On Wikipedia, under human activities, you can see war listed as one of them, almost as if it's something humans do casually or even deliberately. In a way, that's more or less true. For hundreds or even thousands of years, humans have engaged in countless wars, from the Crusades to the Russian Civil War to the Second World War, which holds the highest death toll in history. These conflicts caused immeasurable suffering, forcing people to live in constant fear. What's so devastating is that many of the lives lost were innocent, and yet we still continue to wage war. But has it always been this way? War is not unique to humans. Some animals, like ants and chimpanzees, engage in warfare too. But it's rare, and these animals act out of instinct. We, on the other hand, not so much. Does our biology explain why we wage war? Well, some say no. Sure, we do have the tendency to lash out violently when we're angry or afraid. But war isn't just a fistfight between individuals. It's organized violence carried out by organized groups. We call them clans, tribes, hordes, or nations. These groups direct their violence purposefully, often with a clear goal in mind. It's not irrational, and if they weren't organized, they would be easy to defeat. Culture can also influence how we behave. Because of our strong instinct for self-preservation, some cultures promote bravery, obedience, and even self-sacrifice, things that fit perfectly into a military mindset. Societies like ancient Sparta, Rome, the Aztecs, the Mongols, and even Persia loved war, and they were skilled at it. Even in modern movies and media, we glorify war and make it seem fun, exciting, and clean. They rarely show the true horror or cost of it. It's like a playground where you get to release your inner child, set off some explosives, and watch them go off like firecrackers or fireworks. We even have characters who commit war crimes and still get celebrated as heroes. The irony couldn't be more obvious. In War is Beautiful by David Shields, war photography and journalism are portrayed as beautiful, a stark contrast to reality, and far removed from what they're purported to be. Some argue that war is a result of competition for surplus resources. Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that in the distant past, when humans foraged and hunted for food, war wasn't necessary, since nature provided enough for everyone, especially with such a low population. But once we settled down and became agriculturists, we started accumulating wealth. That allowed class divisions to form, where the powerful rich could live off the labor of the poor. This relatively peaceful era ended with the rise of agriculture and permanent settlements. As people had more to defend, they became more willing to protect what they had. Many early farming communities around the world had walls, which suggest they had enemies. Archaeologists have also found mass graves with signs of trauma, indicating violent conflict. Some cave paintings even show warriors. As societies became more organized and began keeping better records, the evidence of war became even more widespread. Today, it's still happening in many parts of the world. What makes it even sadder is that we already have enough food to feed 10 billion people, yet we waste about a third of it. Renewable energy sources like wind and solar could power the planet many times over. And we also have enough fresh water, housing materials, medicine, and knowledge to ensure that everyone could live decently. Many of the causes of war could be eliminated if we simply chose to distribute our resources more fairly. But the problem is that so much of that wealth is concentrated, and the distribution of resources is far from equal. We could be fixing the systems we live in, but instead, we drop bombs and call it self-defense. Scarcity, it seems, isn't the real cause of war, but rather the belief that some people deserve more than others. As long as we have this mentality, the world will continue to witness the horrors of war and the suffering that accompanies it. However, mentalities and cultures can change. Switzerland and Sweden were once active military powers involved in violent conflicts and territorial expansion. But today, they're known for neutrality and humanitarian efforts. The fact that it's hard to imagine them going to war now is a sign of hope for humanity. War has devastating effects on society, bringing both immediate and long-term suffering and destruction. Soldiers and civilians experience war differently. While both suffer, women and children bear the heaviest burden. In the past decade alone, more than 2 million children have been killed in war. These conflicts leave behind widespread trauma caused by violence and atrocities. Sadly, recent internal wars have led to even higher civilian death tolls than state wars, as civilians are often deliberately targeted. Needless to say, war leads to an unimaginable number of deaths. During the 30 Years' War, the population of the German states dropped by about 30%. The Swedish armies alone destroyed around 2,000 castles, 18,000 villages, and 1,500 towns. In World War I, out of 60 million European soldiers deployed, 8 million were killed, 7 million permanently disabled, and 15 million seriously injured. But it gets even worse. In World War II, estimates suggest that around 60 million people died, 20 million soldiers, and 40 million civilians. Children are the most unfortunate victims of war. They are innocent, yet dragged into conflicts that have nothing to do with them. Since 2011, Syria has seen around 12,000 child deaths due to the uprising against President Bashar al-Assad. In 2023, more than 12,000 children were killed in Palestine in just 2 months, the highest and fastest child death toll in recent history. War can also destroy a country's cities, deeply damaging its economy. Beyond the immediate destruction, the effects ripple outward, harming infrastructure, education, public health, and social stability. War stops innocent civilians from living their daily lives. Everyday activities are disrupted, property is damaged, and many are forced to flee their homes. People can't continue to work, and that harms the country's economy. Governments often redirect funds to support the war effort, leaving other vital institutions underfunded and neglected. This leads to a decline in education and overall quality of life. We can see this clearly today in Gaza, where buildings like UN offices, schools, hospitals, bakeries, and roads have been destroyed. As a result, Palestinians face mass starvation, disease, and widespread displacement. However, there are people who think that wars have benefits. World War II, for example, has always been credited with bringing America out of the Great Depression by stimulating the economy. However, not all conflicts bring about good results. During the Afghanistan and Iraq war period, there was no GDP growth for those countries. In previous cases, like the wars of Louis XIV, the Franco-Prussian War, and World War I, warfare only damaged the economy of the country involved. Russia's involvement in World War I, for example, damaged the economy so badly that it almost collapsed, and that greatly contributed to the start of the Russian Revolution of 1917. War doesn't always kill you through bullets or bombs. Sometimes it is disease that does the killing. During Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, more French soldiers died from typhus than at the hands of the Russians. Between 1500 to 1914, more soldiers were killed by typhus than in all military actions of that time combined. If it were not for medical advances, there would have been thousands more deaths from disease and infection. Death, however, is just the tip of the iceberg. Many of those left behind have to endure the new hell created by war. Some die from exposure, epidemics, or hunger. Others perish years later from wounds or illnesses sustained during the conflict, like the radiation victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. and some survive only to carry their injuries with them into old age. The destruction of war may end with a ceasefire, victory, or surrender, but death doesn't always stop there. After the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese government reported that 42,000 people died in accidents caused by leftover ammunition. These remnants came from the 15 million tons of bombs and explosives used by the US forces, of which 800,000 tons still contaminate about 20% of the country. A similar tragedy unfolds in Cambodia, where landmines remain hidden near schools, wells, and village paths. The suffering falls hardest on civilians, and tragically, 1 in every 3 landmine victims is a child. War often forces people to flee their homes, leading to both internal and external displacement. Internally displaced people lack the protections granted to refugees, while those who cross borders, like many Syrians, may struggle to find safety and acceptance. According to the UNHCR, 65 million people have been displaced, including 21.3 million refugees. Over half of them are children. This puts pressure on host countries and creates hardship for those seeking refuge. The pain of war goes far beyond the battlefield. It haunts both the victims and those who carry out the harm. For the victims, the trauma can last a lifetime. For those who inflicted it, often young and misled by their countries or leaders, the guilt can be just as heavy. Many were told they were doing the right thing and were simply following orders, only to be left with memories they cannot forget. War has no limits. Any potential point of weakness can be exploited, including schools, food factories, farms, and even places of sentimental value like graves and cultural sites. Nazi Germany, for example, stole countless artworks across Europe, including pieces by Van Gogh and Matisse. Cultural assets were also deliberately destroyed as a form of psychological warfare. By targeting symbols of identity, aggressors knew they could deeply wound their enemies, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well. Humans aren't the only ones bearing the weight of conflicts. The environment also suffers deeply. War can wipe out native wildlife, and the destruction of habitats deprives species of the resources they need to survive. Oil spills, chemical contamination, and landmines leave long-lasting damage that takes decades to repair. Pollution of water, air, and soil also threatens the ecosystems and the health of livelihoods of people, often forcing entire communities to abandon their homes. For humans, war brings lasting environmental and health consequences. The use of depleted uranium by the US military during the Persian Gulf War has been linked to cancer cases in Iraq's southern regions. Similarly, during the Vietnam War, the US government used Agent Orange to destroy crops, which killed or maimed around 400,000 Vietnamese. Today, 200,000 suffer from cancer, and 500 children have been born with birth defects as a result. Natural resources are also destroyed for tactical purposes, such as the bombing of oil production facilities during the Gulf Wars to cripple the economy, or the deliberate mining of pastures to deprive enemies of food. That leaves us with the question of why. Why are we doing this? To dominate and possess power? To live up to one's ideals of a better world? Some wars are motivated by a country seeking control over the wealth of another country's resources. Some begin because of religious beliefs, under the conviction that their way of living is the only true way. Others erupt due to clashing ideologies, which in some ways function like religions themselves, with people fighting over the correct way to live. One of the causes that hints at a deeper root problem is ultranationalism, the belief that one's nation is inherently superior or more deserving than others. It often fuels wars of unification, expansion, or independence. And that's basically it. We humans think we're unequal, that we're different from one another. We believe one party is more worthy of life than the other. We know they feel joy and pain, but we assume it's with less complexity, not like us. Just as we acknowledge the pain and joy of animals but still treat them as lesser, we do the same with people. It's a form of exclusion, a failure of empathy. But it's not always black and white. Some wars may be understandable, like when a country defends itself from attack or when people resist an oppressive regime. Still, others argue that war can never be justified under any circumstance. Personally, I think it depends on the situation and whether all other options have truly been exhausted. And even if we choose to retaliate, the only goal in mind should be to stop all violence, not to seek revenge or the destruction of the other party. Nevertheless, it's moronic. Why can't we all realize that war harms not just the victim, but also the aggressor? It's strange how the military and even the public can allow war to happen and even participate in it, engaging in destruction while feeding the aggressor's ego. Don't they realize that victims can always retaliate? Things can spiral out of control so easily, and war only leads to more war and violence. The quest for domination is also foolish. What's the point of being the most powerful if everyone hates you? Especially when you still have to depend on them to survive. Just look at Hitler. He didn't get what he wanted, and in the end, he took his own life. A complete waste of resources, lives, and time. War is really just a distraction from the things that actually matter. After all, we all need and want the same things. If we could just understand each other and work together, we could build a world that's better for everyone. We could live better, eat better, reduce suffering, and make life more meaningful. It's not some wild fantasy. It's actually possible. But there will always be a handful of people who don't want that, because they profit from the imbalance and inequality of the system, even if it costs others their lives. If there's any good use for the military, it's when we unite to face a common enemy, like maintaining peace and security, providing humanitarian relief, search and rescue, or maybe, just maybe, fighting an alien invasion that threatens the existence of humanity. The only wars we should be fighting are against our own demons, like the urge to do harm, cruelty, ignorance, and hatred, or external enemies like climate change, broken systems, corruption, and poverty. Like, come on, there are way more important things worth fighting for. These battles aren't senseless. They actually mean something. They're not about land or pride. They're about fighting the flawed version of ourselves from yesterday. It's a fight to become better and better, and no one has to die for that kind of war. However, there will always be people who inflict unspeakable harm on others. While some can be rehabilitated through support and understanding, others, like serial killers, may be beyond rehabilitation. Maybe we can let the public decide what to do with them. Whatever we choose, at least, is not based on domination, but justice. Honestly, if aliens did show up, that might be the first time we actually stop bombing each other and start using our brains for once. Maybe it takes a catastrophe to make us act like humans. So, will war always be with us? Well, that depends on us. We can always work to prevent future wars. The First and Second World Wars were so devastating that we created a new term for them: total war. We learned that wars can spiral out of control quickly and become extremely difficult to stop, as we can see happening in the world today. Still, we try. We built the League of Nations in 1918, and later the United Nations in 1945, to create a just world where some causes of war could be addressed and future wars prevented. But after a few generations, we've grown complacent and lost that sense of urgency, assuming that major wars can't happen again. That's the same thing people thought in Europe in 1914. History can't predict the future, but it can warn us of what could happen. That's why we must end violence, extremism, and radicalism by choosing understanding and kindness to build trust among people. We would benefit so much more from that. War belongs to another age. It's time we leave it buried in history, where it can no longer hurt us. Thank you so much for watching, and a big thank you to everyone supporting me on Patreon. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you enjoy what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon, where you can also watch some bonus content. So, war, a pretty heavy topic, but I just can't ignore the burden it places on humanity and how incredibly wasteful it is. Let's be kind to each other and make the most of this gift we call life. Thank you. Bye.